Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and of course I'm joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen. Now, a big story in the news is EU versus Brexit. The majority, it seems, of people want out of the EU. Now, I spoke with David Frum, Bush's speechwriter, a few years ago, who claimed that the EU was founded at the Bilderberg Group. There's been some conflicting issues with that. Other people say that that's not the case, but the point is I wanted to kind of go into this because this is part of the kind of globalist pyramid scheme, I suppose you could say, just building up power for globalists and breaking down sovereignty. And Brexit is going to threaten that push. And now the EU, we've had people like Jacob de Rothschild saying that it's a bad idea to pull out of the EU. I don't think anything's more of a good idea just because of what he's saying there. I think that should prove why it's a good idea. George Soros is saying the same as Jacob Rothschild. British MP Jo Cox was recently murdered, who was on the side of the EU, actually, and it's been kind of used to play with people's emotions. And in the end, I mean, this is a great example, though, of how capitalism isn't the problem, but in fact corporate fascism or corporatism, as big corporations are begging the government for their monopolies. They don't want to leave the EU because they want that monopoly that they get out of being part of this massive regulatory system. So John, let's kind of go into this whole situation because we haven't really gone into it much here at WAM.
Yeah, well, and I come from Norway, and Norway is not a European Union member, but it's a EUS member, which means that they actually sometimes pay a lot more than other EU member countries just to be part of the trade agreements and all that.
Yeah.
The European Union is just basically a massive government institution that they created a regional government. You know how we were talking about the New World Order and world government.
What they're trying with the North American Union here.
Yeah, and of course, like they can't just create like one big government for the world without having sub-governments. So the European Union is one of those, I believe, very much. Mm-hmm. So and they're trying to do this, you know, in Asia with the ASEAN and in Americas here with NAFTA and other unions. So it's just a power grab where they try to have complete control over like bigger regions and make a lot of money. There's just a whole bunch of more politicians. There was actually, I watched Brexit, the movie, which is a documentary, a very interesting documentary on, you know, what's going on there with the European Union. And they were asking people on the street if they knew, you know, who this guy was or who that guy was. And nobody had heard any names of the elitist politicians that sits at the European Parliament in Brussels. Yeah. Nobody had a clue who they were. I think United Kingdom in the first place is kind of a mini European Union as well. Like if we can talk about that. I know, you know, we had the Scottish referendum just recently, which they really like pumped into hard with a lot of propaganda to stop it, and they managed just barely to stop it from coming into fruition. And of course, you know, in Britain you have, you know, Wales, you have Northern Ireland, you have Scotland, and you have England. So you have all of these like sub-countries within, so they're a mini European Union in themselves. So I think maybe they should just break up the whole British Empire, which you know how you have Queen Elizabeth and all of her people that are leeching off of the taxpayers, living a very nice life because of owning a lot of stuff, and of course owning some stuff here, I believe, with the CRA in Canada and so on.
Well, it's concentrated power, though, right? Oh, you get 100%. All these things together, and then you have control over way more people, and no big government is big enough for these kinds of globalist fools. And I mean, looking at just what I think Tim Moen said, the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, he said, "I dream of a place where, with 7 billion countries, not like one giant union that collectivizes everyone into, the greater good of the greater number. These few people say this, so we have to force everybody else under that kind of law."
This is a message to people in the UK right now. Study what individualism is and voluntarism, and maybe you can come together as a collective and discuss these ideas, and maybe then go from there and actually become a very wealthy and great place, because you're letting people live their own lives without massive government intervention. And of course, it's a massive tax haven for the bankers. So the bankers, really love it because they've been, it's been a massive oligarchy for some of the big bankers there. It's huge tax haven, of course.
Now, I wanted to ask you, John, a lot of people like George Soros, Jacob Rothschild, people like the people at JP Morgan, they are claiming that this is going to, like the Brexit is going to affect negatively the housing market. What do you say to those people?
Well, it's definitely going to affect markets in general in a negative way, because what's going to happen is that the European Union, with that, there's going to be a domino effect where there's going to be more and more countries like, well, I don't want to, like, if Great Britain is not going to be part of this, why do I want to be a part of this?
Yeah.
So you're going to have like a domino effect, of course.
But it's a good thing because it needs to, it's like a controlled collapse, and then you build up from scratch there, and it's much better.
The euro in itself is a stupid idea, having one like region central currency. It's the same as a special drawing right there in the world currency. And then, of course, you have, with the European Union and how it was created, you have horrible economy and managed economies with governments, which is, a lot of the southern states like Italy, Portugal, Spain, Greece, and so on, that are just massive when you look at their government expenditure as a part of GDP. All of them are over 50%, which means that they're unsustainable governments, and that's what really collapsed and bankrupted Greece. Well, Greece is not bankrupt on the paper, but but they really are.
Logically speaking,
and that brings us back to the big banks in the European Union, of course, and all that comes with these banks actually lending money for the European. It's not the European Central Bank that lends money; it's the private bankers that actually lends this money to the sovereign nations within the European Union. And now they really have tried to focus on bringing in a banking union where you have one big central bank, and then they have full control over all the money printed. Now it's kind of an issue where local governments overspend too much, and they just create way too much money at the local level, and it kind of destroys for the euro. And of course, Western countries in the eurozone are in the demographic cliff, in a natural deflationary state right now, where the older population, the baby boomers, are retiring, and especially Germany and others, they are really like shrinking in size. While the problem is, these bankers, they need growth, so that's also another thing that they want that control, because if you have several places, now you will have several hyperinflations with their system.
And of course, people like Jacob de Rothschild aren't a fan of this, because he's got his hands in like basically every central bank in the world, and this brings him down one step from getting closer to creating things like a world currency. And I mean, the euro is a beautiful example of how that goes wrong, and just a small extent of what it would be if it did cover the entire planet.
Well, and look at what is happening with the European Union countries right now. Well, most of them are in austerity, where they actually cut government spending. First they made them depend on the government, and now they're going to cut government spending, so they force people to I want my government to save me. So like they come back and actually beg the government, to save them with giving them money for free. But the problem is, like, look at Greece, for example, and other countries. They have to raise taxes because the productive people have left. I talked to people from Portugal. Actually, we have a huge, here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, we have a huge concentration of Portuguese people that have moved over, especially from 2008 and so on and out. They moved here because the productive people always leave a country, and then you have a lot of unproductive people left, very little business people, and then
there's been a lot of studies
stuck with massive government and people being very dependent on the government, and it's unsustainable, and we're just completely collapsed because all the people that actually propped up the big governments with their productivity and then paying taxes on it, they're gone.
Yeah, and capitalism can't exist with government intervention and manipulation. And what we're seeing right now is a great example of corporatism, corporate fascism, trying to, save their monopolies, these big corporations that couldn't survive the way they do without government. It's big corporations with their monopolies through government that allow them to have such a hold on the market and be able to stand above all the small businesses that can't get anywhere because they try and they just can't face off against these massive monopolies, these too big to fail companies that are basically created by the hand of the state. I mean, these companies like McDonald's and Walmart couldn't have sustained the massive monopolies that they have been able to get their hands on if it weren't for government. And just pulling out of the EU is going to affect a lot of these big corporations and their monopolies, and they're not happy about this. So capitalism comes from the individual, free market, no government intervention. We exchange something in return for something else. And monopolies, corporatism, corporate fascism, which people too often call capitalism, is actually basically what is causing all these problems at the hand of government. So free markets mean that you have a say, you have a demand, you pay for what you want, and that counts as a vote towards that product. But today it doesn't matter what you want, it's about what the government wants, and what the government wants for their monopolies through these massive corporations, central banks, just banking, the banking system in general. And I mean, this is just another great example of it, and I'm glad that we have been able to kind of talk about this, because this is just one massive example of what we've been talking about for so long.
Yeah, and the problem is, again, as I want to say this very only because what is going on right now is a natural deflationary state in most Western countries, and these central banks are trying to create inflation and they can't. So that's why their big European Union empire is collapsing. First of all, the population is aging and there's not enough people to take over to keep the government sustainable. And then, of course, most of the productive people is left, the European Union.
So a question, John, do you think they will leave the EU, or do you think the EU will win and the central bankers will win?
They will win. Unfortunately, I think that's what's going to happen. They would say like, oh yeah, it's completely fair. I think it's going to be, a lot of foul play and stuff involved to
and now
just desperately keep the status quo be. But if it actually happens that they will leave, well, I think we're going to see a market crash happen right now, because but then that's a great diversion from the real problems that we have, of course, and they could blame that. So it's a 50-50. It's very hard to tell, like, from if they're going to manipulate it or if it's actually going to be true.
And these disgraceful globalist scumbags are using the death of a woman, MP Jo Cox, for their advantage. And it just shows how disgraceful these people are, that they would use the heartstrings of the people to push their globalist agenda, which victimizes the people. So thank you, John, for another excellent report, and we'll be back at you with much more coming up. So stay tuned to World Alternative Media. This is Josh Sigurdson, John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.